My name is Ben Chamberlain. I'm UMT 360's Chief Product and Marketing Officer, and will also be monitoring today's session. I'm particularly excited about today's session as it marks the first in a series where we will explore the steps project management offices can take to build an enterprise PMO that goes beyond managing tactical but important aspects of project execution to take strategic responsibility for optimizing spend and maximizing ROI. I think today more than ever, PMOs face a daunting task of being responsible for managing all aspects of the project portfolio. First, it goes without saying, they must be experts in project governance, resource management, and execution. Second, they must start to take responsibility for the money and almost become the CFO of the project portfolio. And finally, work with executives to more effectively align execution with strategy. I think it's this complexity is one of the main reasons why this topic proves to be so popular. Today's session has registrants from over 17 different verticals, from 60 countries, multiple attendees from the same organization, and a diverse set of roles from PMO all the way up to CXOs, both on the business side and the IT side. Before I introduce Carl, I would like to run a poll to understand which PPM tool you guys are using. So the options are here. Which PPM tool are you using? The options are Microsoft Project Server, or many of you may know that as the Microsoft EPM solution, Clarity from CA, PlanView, or other. Other could include HP, PPM, tools like Aptar, Adaptive, other cloud-based PPM tools, or none. We take a few seconds just to answer this, and then we'll share the results. So as you can see here, actually Microsoft Project Server comes in highest, around 31% of the attendees today. CA Clarity at 9%, PlanView at 7%, other, which obviously is a fairly big bucket, around 29%. And the last but not least, none or don't know with 24%. So we close the poll and move on. So with no further delay, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Carl Souchereau. UMT team has had the privilege of working closely with Carl over the last 4 years. Based on Carl's experience, I can't think of a better person to lead today's discussion. As the director of the PMO at TransAlta, Carl built a strategic function responsible for managing all aspects of a $100 million project portfolio. More recently, as the project director at SNC Lavalin, Carl is responsible for managing a $2.1 billion program to build the Western Alberta transmission line, where the focus is more on project execution. Carl also served as an officer in the Royal Canadian Navy and unwinds by competing in triathlons. With that, Carl, please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Ben. I guess good morning, everybody, from sunny Calgary, Alberta. That's where I'm sitting right now. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today and joining us. I certainly hope in some way this next hour is helpful and beneficial to your strategic PMO or enterprise PMO journey. I'd also like to thank UMT 360, specifically Ben Chamberlain and Paul Rosian, for allowing me the opportunity to share my experiences with you. In SNC Lavalin, one of our core values, obviously, with most engineering and construction companies is regarding safety. So I'm just going to kick off with about a 30-second safety moment here. It's around distracted driving, and it's near and dear to us right now, as one of our employees was recently killed in a motor vehicle accident. Although they're still doing the investigation, you know, there is some evidence to think that there may have been something going on there regarding distracted driving. So I just remind everybody of the dangers of that, and if at all possible, avoid looking at your PDA, looking at your cell phone, iPhone, whatever you use while you're driving. Take the time to pull off the road and take the call, or put it in the glove box, out of sight, out of mind. Okay? So the agenda for today, really a few points. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tactical level, more at the project manager level, and how they can help enhance PPM governance. We'll then go on to investment planning and your annual planning as an organization. And then finally, how you actually manage those projects and optimize the return, and using the executive team to make business decisions. And then finally, we'll close it off with question and answers and discussions, and then Paul and Beth will talk about the next step. I've always felt, in my experience, that an EPMO is really the strategic execution engine of an organization. And I think, you know, when you consider what the EPMO or the journey that you're on, think of that as the end in mind, that you want to be taking the strategy of the organization and being part of and actually driving the execution of it. So, to be truly an enterprise PMO, your organization must have mastered and work effectively in all three of these domains, as all three carry equal weight. However, my experience and that of my fellow panel members is that the majority of today's PMOs operate and focus mainly on tactical project execution. It's certainly not a bad thing that you're focusing attention here, but to be an enterprise PMO, you have to go beyond that into the investment governance and the strategic planning. Right of center and mature PMOs conduct robust and repeatable strategic planning and investment governance functions. So there's more to it than that, and getting right of center means that you have to go into those domains and work effectively there. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide is really a segue into our first area of focus today. And essentially what we're looking at here is depicting the life cycle of a project within an operating PPM framework with governance controls throughout. So through the create, select, plan, manage, and evaluate, there are controls throughout. And in the strategic domain that we're talking about, heavy lifting and focus occurs in the creation and selection of projects for the investment. Whereas when you're thinking of the tactical domain, so when I speak about tactical and strategic, I'm thinking about the create and select, that front end. And then from a tactical perspective, it's more on the plan and manage. And then finally, the evaluation of the return on investment of those completed projects with a benefits realization framework of some sort actually brings it full circle. So the entire life cycle is actually being evaluated, and you've got controls throughout. As well, at the strategic level, there's a reporting functionality that must be in place. You're looking at it from a portfolio level, and there's a significant amount of financial management. Let's face it, for most organizations, that's where the headspace of most of the executives is on that financial return. Whereas at the tactical level, your project managers are about project execution and making sure they got the right bums in the seats to execute and work on those projects. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So let's get a little bit more in depth here. So let's talk about the tactical for a moment through the lens of an enterprise PMO. After all, if your organization cannot execute projects, what's the point? You have to be good at it. And we talked earlier when we talked about those three domains, is that we spend a lot of time at the tactical level because that's where we operate in. So, but we have to get good at it. My experience in a strategic EPMO came with a whole raft of challenges at the tactical level. And when you look at the common challenges you see here, it should come as no surprise. However, to effectively operate there, not only do you do work right, but you're also working on the right work, and these challenges need to be addressed. One thing to point out here is that a conscious decision to invest in your project management competencies for your project managers is critical here. Specifically when it comes to cost estimating and forecasting. I'll get back to this a little bit later on in the presentation, but really focusing on having solid cost estimates and a really robust forecasting capability is crucial, especially when we're talking about managing the projects once they're into your plan and manage stage, and your teams are evaluating the performance of projects in flight. When it comes to status reporting and data collection, all of us, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar, has felt some level of pain here, ranging from the constant requirement of creation of PowerPoint presentations for reporting progress to inputting the same data into a multitude of spreadsheets. As you develop any technical solution, such as what UMT 360 is a good example, you have the ability to leverage the technology of the system, whereby at the tactical level, data collection only happens once and used by everyone. So when we talk about input once, used by many, that's what we're talking about here. I'll explain a little bit more in detail when we move to the next slide. But finally, to support the continuous improvement of the EPMO, the establishment of a project management level working group can be very beneficial here, because really they're the ones who are the voice at the project manager level for continuous improvement, and they're the ones who are feeding information both to the EPMO around challenges and problems, but they're also the ones that are communicating and socializing any changes coming from the EPMO. So setting up of a tactical level working group is a very beneficial thing. My experience has been that it was probably one of the best things we did in my previous organization, because it really became that conduit as well as that guiding coalition of people who not only supported the direction of the EPMO, but were also the ones boots on the ground doing the work, and were actually working in the tool. So, and then finally, and this goes for everything when we're talking about rolling out a technical solution, when we're talking about forecasting, estimating, KPIs to measure performance or whatever, is keep it simple. Organizations have a tendency to overcomplicate things, and keeping it simple and not getting that what I like to call complexity creep into your reporting is something you want to be thinking about as well. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. So I talked in the previous slide around reporting, and I know this is near and dear to everybody. And really, the objective of automating reporting is quite simple, and it's providing your PMs more freedom and more time to spend in the project planning and execution piece, and less time buried in spreadsheets or developing reports. Again, we've all lived that nightmare. We're all living it today in many cases. I'm sure a lot of you are feeling that burn right now. But at the end of the day, the automation of project status reporting is really for that purpose. To think it's about, I always like to think it's more of a cascade. It's more important to cascade it down than to put the information up. In that, while yes, you can, satisfy the asks and the questions of seniors, whether it's your boss or up right through to an executive level group, the bottom line is you want to be providing your project managers the freedom and the latitude to really get their head down and do the work. And the more time you spend, as you know, buried in spreadsheets or building PowerPoint presentations to make a report, that's where people feel the heartburn. In my previous organization in TransAlta, we actually took a very aggressive approach in this area. As when we did our evaluations, evaluations of our project teams and got feedback from them, it was a very significant pain point in the organization. So we felt, well, if we're going to get buy-in and we're going to get the organization at the project manager level specifically to support and buy into the EPMO model, we have to make their life easier. So we went to really spend a lot of time in this area on how we can automate the reporting. And where we actually got to was quite impressive, and I'm quite proud of that, in that we actually got to a place where the project managers were inputting, whether it was cost, schedule, benefits, or resource data into a single place, into our PPM tool, and they did all of their work in there, their scheduling, their cost estimating, everything in one place. And all that, whether they're supervisors or up the chain of command, all they needed to do was pull the lever on the PPM system, and the dashboards would be displayed in a manner which suited them and provided them the information. One thing to keep in mind here, though, is that you can, when I talk about, what did I call it? Kind of talked a little bit about complexity creep. The dashboards need to be simple and easy to understand and intuitive. So as much as possible, bend the audience to meet the requirements of the dashboard, as opposed to bending the dashboard to meet the requirements of those of the audience. So there's got to be a balance there, where it's providing enough information to answer the question or lead someone in the direction they need to go to find the answer. But too much information can actually be a bad thing and just lead to confusion. In this area, I had a bit of a watershed moment in TransAlta one morning. This was probably about a year and a half into our journey, where I got a call directly from the CFO of the organization, and he asked me, how do you access the portfolio management system? Because he had some questions around some financial information on some projects. So I kind of, at that moment, I went, okay, we're starting to get some traction here when the CFO, you know, at the right hand of the CEO, is asking questions on to answer his questions regarding a financial question for a project, as opposed to going into our ERP system. And when that happened, I knew that you know, something was actually sticking to the wall. Okay, so next slide, and I think we're going to move into a poll question. So I'm going to hand it back to Ben at this point.
Thank you, Carl. So the next poll, which best describes your current status or performance tracking capabilities? Option 1, or the first option, no standardized performance metrics across the portfolio. Second option, standardized metrics, but work is manual for PMs and PMOs. Third option, standardized metrics, process data reports are fully automated. The first option, again, no standardized performance metrics across the PMO and kind of weak overall status reporting. You've standardized the metrics, a second option, but it's a huge amount of work for project managers and PMOs to run through the status reporting process. Or the third option, standardized metrics, and the whole process is fully automated from a data and reports perspective. %of you voting that no standardized metrics across the portfolio. Majority voting that they have standardized metrics, but it is a tough job for PMs and PMOs to reconcile and build the reports, whereas only 14% saying it's a fully automated process. And this is what we see day in, day out when we're speaking with customers. What are your thoughts about?
Nice bell curve we have here. What's interesting, I'm actually quite I'm enthused to see that at least that the majority of the folks, more than half, are in that middle band. My journey began at the top there, where there was really no standardized performance metrics across the portfolio. And in my previous organization, it was like trying to hit as I called it, naval gunnery, and I'm going to go back to my naval background. It was like trying to hit a moving target from a moving platform through moving air, and trying to get a fire control solution, trying to find out the exact solution I needed was a very difficult place. And it's hard for all project managers if they don't know what they're going after. So it's good to see that we've got some, you know, at least half of you, or more than half, are in that place where it's standardized. At least now it's more about getting automated. We're going to move away from the tactical here for a minute, and we're going to spend some more time talking about investment planning or annual planning. Same thing, but essentially it's that it's in the front end here, and we're talking about strategy and budgeting, annual planning and portfolio optimization, and then business case development. It's in that area right there, and basically about the first third of that life cycle. Typically done at the front end of a project's life cycle, and historically, and I'm speaking from experience here, organizations tend to rely on their senior management to carry out this function. While, you know, developing a strategy and determining what the budget is for an organization is absolutely at the senior level of an organization. The business case development and the selection of projects, it can't be just isolated at that level. What we're talking about here is which projects in an organization will the organization spend its precious limited funds on, and ensuring the investments are aligned with the strategic direction of the organization. In other words, this is about doing the right work, okay? So, and all the work that you're doing, or all the work that you're trying to get into your organization, and the investments that the company is trying to make and decide upon, are somehow linked and driven by the organizational strategy. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. Okay, so you can go to the next one. So, you know, investment planning in an organization or a company is not a lot different than what you do in your regular everyday lives. We, as worker bees, have limited funds available every year that we can spend, investing in our own money, and we try to find the best place to put it to get the maximized return. And a company is no different. There's always more asks than there is money. So somehow organizations have to come to grips that there's going to be investments that are going to be left on the table. But it's now about finding the right ones to get the most return. Selecting the right investments and understanding with some level of certainty how they will perform is the place enterprise PMOs want to go. And that's really that area that we talked about in those three, in that pie graph we talked about at the beginning. If your organizations were like mine, when I started on my PMO journey, it really became who squawked the loudest or had the fanciest PowerPoint presentations typically got the money, with limited data or no science to back up or support a business case, if there even was a business case. In many cases, resulting in a poor investment decision and stranding a significant amount of investment for an organization. Where we wanted to go and where we got to was that place where we could prioritize all of our projects or all those investment opportunities from one to whatever. In TransAlta, for example, any given year we had anywhere between 300 to 350 different opportunities or investment projects that we could have done. And they ranged from, and TransAlta was a power generation company, so they had existing power plants, so you could spend money on maintaining your existing plants. You could spend money on upgrades to those plants to get more power or more output out of them. Or you could actually take those dollars and make an investment on a new power plant. But somehow being able to compare one to the other is a very, very difficult place. And it's easier said than done. But the executive team really are the foundation here, and it begins and ends with them. They're the executive team with the CEO. They're the ones who set the strategic plan for the organization. And it begins with a set of strategic drivers. In TransAlta, we had 6 of them, and they ranged from safety to economic return to things like more around reputation would be another one. We had 6 of these drivers, and we weighted them for a total of 100%. And then what we did is taking all of those investment opportunities and evaluating them against those strategic drivers. What happens then when you do that, every single investment, whether it's a sustaining capital project, a new investment, or greenfield development, was weighted, and it provided a prioritization list from 1 to 350, for example. And then it becomes, well, we only have this much money to spend, so there's the cut line. Now, the technical solutions out there, and UMT 360 is a good one that did this. In fact, we used that tool, actually provided an automated way to evaluate projects. You pull the lever and it would evaluate the projects and show you from 1 to 350. Now, you just don't take it at face value. There has to be a level of review and a level of scrutiny put on your prioritization list because, again, garbage in, garbage out. If scanty information or poor data is put in, then obviously the prioritization and weighting of projects will be skewed as well. I talked about the importance of cost estimating very early in this presentation, and this is where you're going to see where strong cost estimates start to rear their head and start to emerge. So demand realism in the estimates, because those errors will emerge at some point, and it's an easier conversation before you kick off a project as opposed to later. The other one is that poor cost estimating or putting fluff into those cost estimates, for example, is actually eroding the value and stranding capital or putting it in a place where you can't access it. So that's something you certainly want to avoid. Leverage the technology in the development of your business cases and review the investments. And I used the TransAlta example where when we did this prioritization exercise, at the operational level, they would look at their list of projects and the priority, and they kind of really do a bit of a sanity check whereby we'd say, okay, you look at the top third of those projects and say, which of these projects shouldn't be in the top third? Why would we never do these projects? Then the bottom third, you'd say, why would we ever do these? And there may be 1 or 2 that are in there because there's some wrong information, but do that sanity check. And then the middle third of the projects, it becomes really how much capital do I have to spend and what kind of resources do I have in the organization to execute them. And then finally, once a decision is made, and in your annual planning and investment is you committed to make the investment, it's about sticking to it, resourcing it fully, and communicating the decision and socializing it. And then again, holding the organization, the project sponsor, and the project teams accountable to deliver it. So this is where there is a significant amount of opportunity for an organization to reduce the amount of time it takes on an annual basis and how much level of effort, instead of time, I'm just going to say level of effort, heavy lifting it takes to actually come up with your annual business plan. Okay? So this one is really kind of walking through the steps. Can you keep clicking, get all the parts? Thank you. This slide just depicts what I spoke about earlier, more on a workflow. The executive team here develops and agrees on the strategic drivers for the organization and weights them based on the importance. And all of your organizations are different, so I really don't, I can't say what that'll look like, but don't make too many. I would suggest anywhere between 4 to 6 at the most, okay? Concurrently, deep in your organization, investment opportunities are being explored and business cases are being developed. Business cases are evaluated on the strategic driver, evaluated against the strategic drivers, and the outcome is a prioritized list from 1 to whatever based on the strategy of your company. You conduct a sanity check, which is, again, we're talking about the review, that top, middle, and bottom third approach, and then basically running your constraints analysis, which is how much money do I have and how many people do I have to do it. And then after you've made that cut and you've determined what the list looks like, you review your portfolio one more time and you approve it. And once that decision is made, it's final. It's no additional projects are shoehorned in because they're sitting on the corner of somebody's desk, or and this is where the company has to be very committed to this, that they don't allow skunk works and those other types of projects to emerge and get into the annual plan because someone thinks it's a good idea. The days of the good ideas club has to stop if you want to be effective and have any credibility in your EPMO. So really demand and expect your executive teams to hold themselves accountable to that one as well. And then again, like I said, finally what comes out is your portfolio for the year. And then it moves into your plan and manage phase, and then it's now about optimizing the return on those projects. So at this point, go to the next slide, and I think we're going to go into another poll question. Ben?
Thanks, Carl. So the third poll, which best describes your annual planning with respect to process, business case framework, and metrics? And the options we have here, I have no templates and metrics to consolidate project requests. So there's no ability to centralize project requests within the organization and standardize business case framework. Second option, we have a central repository, but data is often disconnected. Often you find that the data around the request is held in disparate tools such as Excel, PowerPoint, and others. Third option, I have a single system for consolidating requests and scoring competing project requests. And the last option, we have that single system for capture requests, and selected projects, as Carl described, are aligned against strategy. Share the results. So let's take a quick look here, and we'll gauge Carl's feedback too. So the first option, with only 13% of the weighting, no ability to centralize requests and standardize business case templates. Probably not, again, too much of a surprise. The second option has the highest weighting, 51%, which is we are today consolidating project requests, but again, the metadata concerning those requests are often managed in different tools like Excel for financials and PowerPoint for actually demonstrating and presenting the business case. We have the third option with 23% of the weighting. We are centralizing all requests and scoring them for multiple dimensions, 23% of the weighting, and only 14% following the full portfolio optimization process that Carl mentioned, specifically aligning project requests against strategy. And again, I think that's what we see out there in the marketplace. Carl, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that's yeah, results are, it's kind of what we've seen, or at least, you know, even my experience where we started on the journey that I've been on was sort of in, you know, answer number 1, 2, somewhere in the middle there. When I think of my experience, there was, and I mentioned it earlier, is that there were templates to use, but it depended on which business unit you were in within the organization would dictate which template you would use. Even something as simple as a business case. The business case template varied from business unit to business unit, and therefore when you're looking at two business cases, you weren't actually looking at the same fields and weren't comparing apples to apples. So something very important here, and a strong recommendation from me, given my experience doing this, is that automate your business case process, right? Get it into your portfolio management system so that you can automate it as much as you can, because business cases have just as much value 10, 15 years down the road as they do today, in that you don't try and reinvent the wheel, i.e. you've done this type of project before, so you've got a business case for something similar. Or two, you're not trying to repeat a project that at some point in the past was not going to have the return you wanted. So you can identify very quickly if someone else is, if someone is trying to repeat or try to shoehorn in a project that, quite frankly, didn't have legs 10 years ago. So why are you trying to do it again? And then, of course, you've got all that data captured, and you can analyze it and dice and slice it any way you want. as you move into or selecting your projects for investments. So let's go to the next one. So this last part of the presentation, we talk a little bit about squeezing and maximizing return from your investment decisions. So we talk about the dynamic planning and reallocation process, and you can see this red box, which that we're talking about, occurs in the plan and manage. So for the point of reference, the project has been selected for funding, and now you're in the planning and managing. The projects are now fully resourced. Their projects are being planned and managed by the project managers and their teams. And one thing about this area, it's extremely important and requires accurate data from the projects, in that when we talked about status reporting, we talked about it many times, automating the status reporting and being able to have a distinct set of KPIs that from a dynamic planning and reallocation perspective, that those that are actually looking at this and looking at it on a regular basis are looking at a set of metrics that are being applied to all of your projects, regardless of what type of investment it is, so that you can very quickly determine which projects are performing well and which ones aren't. Okay? So let's go on to the next slide, and I'll speak about this more in detail. So early in a project's life cycle, there's always some level of uncertainty around cost and schedule. However, a decision to invest in the project has typically been made once you get to this point. So as the projects develop, information emerges and clarity on your cost and schedule start to emerge. That's expected. Don't shy away from it, face into it, and understand that it's early in a project's life cycle, so you don't have all the information, but you have enough to go on. I always think of the United States Marines handbook that talks about making a decision on the 70% solution. Well, it's kind of the same thing here, in that you're making an investment decision based on 70% accuracy of the data. And know that that last 30% will emerge over time. So don't be afraid of it, it's gonna happen. But understand and recognize that you are limited there, okay? I did mention earlier around the importance of forecasting, the cost estimating, and investing in that skill set. This is where it really pays off. Poor estimating and forecasting will show up in either overrunning your project and causing pressure on your overall portfolio, or underrunning, and in that case, underrunning is stranding valuable capital. Good example would be a $100 million project. You're forecasting to be at 75 million at project completion. However, the project is still hanging on to 100 million and holding on to that $25 million of capital. Well, that really, from maximizing a return, that's not really in the best interest of the organization. You've stranded $25 million that can be used elsewhere. So it's important either way, whether you're overrunning or underrunning, and poor forecasting and estimating is a problem. So hence the need for organizations to get good at this, and you can never invest enough money and time in this domain when it comes to portfolio optimization and dynamic reallocation, okay? Consistently evaluating the performance of projects with a standardized set of metrics is crucial. Your choice on what you decide really and to evaluate is really up to you. In TransAlta, when we did this, we really used 4 things. We used cost, schedule, benefits. That's benefits being what kind of a return are you expecting, and then finally resources. And you wonder, resources, why that? Because every project that we ever found, and I'm sure a lot of you experienced this, if you don't have the right level of resources to support the development and execution of the project, it's going to fail. 99 times out of 100, your project's going to fail. So before we would even kick off a project, we made absolutely certain that we had people named to the organization chart for that project, and I cannot stress enough the importance of that, and I'm sure all of you are aware of that fact. So we use that as a metric throughout the project to ensure that if we had the right resources, we had the money, then typically the projects had a higher probability and reasonable chance of success. So who does the reviews and evaluates the performance based on the data coming from the projects? In my experience, and what we did is we set up an investment committee. An investment committee, they were typically, and I like to think of them as decision makers. These are folks that are identified and provided the authority to make decisions, and the authority is delegated down to them from the executive team. This group they started off with developing a team charter that basically laid out, and I'd suggest you do this as well, the mandate, what they do, how they want to show up, how often they're going to meet, what decisions they're going to make, and then finally what they won't do. And it's important that you lay that out in a team charter, and that investment committee commits themselves to it. They absolutely have to meet on a regular basis. I would suggest that anything longer than 2 months between meetings is probably too long if you're on an annual cycle. We met on a monthly basis, and even ad hoc if we had to, depending on whether something emerged that needed immediate attention, but typically it was once a month. They're expected to make objective decisions and leave their egos at the door. I know that many folks, and make no mistake, when they get into those senior levels in organizations, are typically type A personalities. And there's an expectation that when they go to the investment committee table, that they put that aside and they make decisions based on the data in front of them and their objective decisions, but they are expected to make tough decisions. They'll review performance of projects and make some decisions. Specifically what I mean is that a project comes forward, they're overrunning in costs, and the investment committee can see that because they see that in their metrics when they do their portfolio review, and they really have to make a decision. Do they continue to fund the project? And continue means, do they add funding? 2, do they off-ramp the project and say, you know what, this is not going where we want to off-ramp it, we don't want to continue? I would suggest that if that's the case, you make those decisions early and then reallocate that capital to other investments. And what I mean by other investments, I'll talk about this in the next slide, but this is about having other projects available that you can tap into. And then finally, communicate the decisions. Once the decisions are made, communicate. Make sure the project teams are aware of what the decisions are, and you don't look back. You communicate and execute. Okay, next slide, please. This one really is the workflow of what I previously talked about in the slide earlier. The investment committee, that steering committee review, as you can see, reviews the change request coming in from the project. So there's a change request that you can see on block number 4 in the project status reporting. There's a change request. This can come in the form of more funding, ask for more money, or they're going to make a change to release some funding if they're underrunning. The investment committee then reviews and decides to approve or reject the change order. They approve it, it means they're going to add more funding, and more funds are coming and will likely result in eroding of the return, but they're aware of it and they got visibility on what that looks like. Rejection of the change usually means the project is in trouble and likely not going to achieve the desired result. As such, the project can be canceled. Thus, this is what I talk about, the off-ramp. What that also does is that it also liberates capital. It also liberates resources. So you can either park it and not spend that money, or the investment committee can make a conscious decision to take that capital and allocate it to another project, which is sitting in as a new project ready to go. But this requires a hopper ready to go and fully resourced projects. So in order to have this level of dynamic reallocation, there has to be a list of projects available that are going to have, which is the next best thing in your list of projects. And once the tough decisions are made, funded project goes back into the portfolio and continues on its regular rhythm of evaluation. Quite simple. Okay. So last one, I'll hand it back to Ben for the next poll, and then we'll move on to the final slides.
Right. So last poll. Which best describes your organization's current ability to take corrective action and dynamically reallocate funds across the portfolios? And the options are here. We currently do not have a dynamic reallocation process in place. We are planning to adopt a dynamic reallocation process as outlined by Carl. Third option, we have a regular dynamic reallocation reviews, but the process, again, is manual and sort of requires heavy lifting from the PMO. And the last option, do have a regular dynamic reallocation reviews, and the process from a data and reports perspective is automated. So look at the results here, and again, no real surprise to us that around 60% either do not have a reallocation process or are planning to adopt one. So 48% do not have, 12% are planning to adopt in the future. 39% do have ongoing portfolio reviews at a cadence of quarterly, monthly, let's say, but the process is manual, and only 1% have fully automated the process. Again, Carl, just conscious of time here, I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to hear the common benefits you've realized. So I'm going to suggest we just move on to the next slide.
Please. So I just wanted to end the presentation before I move to Q&A on my experiences regarding the benefits of my experiences. At the strategic level, we took about 10% of the level of effort to complete our annual budgeting cycle. Certainly worth the price of admission when you take into account the salaries of executive team and senior leadership. We had certainly had a trust in the data that I spoke about the CFO, and that all data, cost, schedule, benefits, and resourcing was isolated to a single place, so there was no hunting required to get the data you needed. And as time went on, sponsors felt more comfortable with the status of their projects and were comfortable speaking about the performance. So kind of a new territory for sponsorship when you think that sponsors are ultimately accountable for the delivery of the benefits. So from the tactical perspective for the PMs, it was about productivity, right? They had more time, and they were just provided some more time to plan and manage their projects, less time reporting. They were consistently evaluated in the same measures month over month, no longer that moving target. Single source of the truth, but it obviously began with a single point of entry, and our technical solution that we developed did that. And finally, the PMs became a huge advocate of PPM, not only because it made their life a little easier, but they also felt part of the solution through the working group. Their concerns were heard, and more importantly, were addressed on a regular basis. So I guess with that, that concludes my presentation. And before moving to Q&A, I'll hand back to Ben to discuss some next steps.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for a great and informative presentation.